Bloodsport. The heavy bag swayed slightly in the empty gym as David Erickson landed one last combination. Jab, cross, leg kick. The movements were perfect. They always were when no one was watching. That was half the problem. "You're still here?" His own voice echoed in the vacant space, a habit he'd picked up from years of trying to fill silence with something, anything. His father's words from breakfast still rang in his ears, sharper than any punch he'd ever taken. 32 years old, David. Still playing fighter while your sister's making partner at her firm. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as he wiped down the bag, his post-class ritual becoming a meditation against memories. This morning's argument had been the same one they'd had for 15 years, ever since he dropped out of business school to pursue MMA full-time. Every family dinner turned into a sparring match of passive-aggressive jabs and thinly veiled disappointment. Teaching people to fight, his father had scoffed. That's not a career, son. That's extended adolescence. David's hand tightened on the cleaning spray. His next amateur fight was in 3 weeks. He'd lost his last one, a split decision that still haunted him. The judges had seen what everyone else saw: hesitation. That microscopic pause before his takedowns, the slight telegraph before his combinations. Perfect technique, his coach said, but something was holding him back. He knew what it was. That voice in his head, sounding suspiciously like his father's, asking if he was just pretending, playing fighter. The same voice that whispered during his classes, suggesting his students respected the belt more than the man wearing it. The cleaning spray clattered against the storage cabinet, louder than he'd intended. David checked his watch, past 11. He'd been hiding out here for hours after his last class, drilling combinations like they could somehow answer his father's questions about his life choices. He took a final look around his domain: the heavy bags, the grappling dummies, the cage where he'd trained hundreds of students. During the day, it was his proof that he'd built something real. At night, it felt like evidence for his father's arguments. Just an oversized playground where he could pretend to be a warrior. The click of the gym door's lock echoed through the empty parking lot. David's tired muscles tensed as realization hit him. His keys sat on his office desk, visible through the darkened window, mocking him from their little metal hook. "Damn it," he muttered, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Through the window, the keys gleamed under the security light like a taunt. 3 back-to-back classes had left his mind foggy, his usual sharp attention dulled by exhaustion. He tried the door handle again, knowing it was futile. The familiar environment of West Side MMA suddenly felt different in the darkness. Security lights cast long shadows across the parking lot, turning the usual landscape of cars and concrete into something alien. David rolled his shoulders, trying to shake off the creeping sensation of vulnerability. He was being ridiculous. He'd trained here for 8 years, taught for 5. This was his territory. But tonight, something felt wrong. A sudden breeze carried autumn's chill, raising goosebumps on his exposed arms. The rustling of leaves seemed louder than it should be, more deliberate. David's fighting instincts, honed through countless sparring sessions, began to buzz. Something was off about the shadows near the dumpsters. He turned, scanning the lot. Nothing moved, but the silence felt heavy, expectant. Like the moment before an opponent throws the first punch, a flash of red caught his eye. Just a glimpse in the reflection of a parked car's window. Hair, he thought. Bright red hair. But when he turned, there was nothing there. "Hello?" His voice sounded smaller than he intended. No response, just that weighted silence. Another movement, this time at the edge of his vision. David spun, falling automatically into a fighting stance. The parking lot remained empty, but he could have sworn he heard a soft laugh like silk over steel. He needed to move. The main street was 3 blocks away. People, lights, safety. His legs felt heavy as he began walking, forcing himself to move at a measured pace. Running was what Prey did. He wasn't Prey. He was a trained fighter, a welterweight with a 12-3 record. He'd faced down men who wanted to hurt him before. The laugh came again, closer. Definitely a woman's laugh, but wrong somehow. Too sharp, too hungry. "Who's there?" David called out, his voice stronger now, anger pushing back against the fear. "I can hear you." "Good." The voice came from behind him, impossibly close. David whirled, fists raised, but there was no one there. His heart hammered against his ribs. Run. The thought came from somewhere primitive, somewhere deeper than his fighting training. Every instinct screamed at him to flee. He fought it for one more moment, pride warring with survival. Then he saw her, standing beneath a security light that should have illuminated every detail. Instead, the light seemed to bend around her, creating shadows where there shouldn't be any. Red hair gleamed like fresh blood. Her smile showed fangs. David ran. His feet pounded against the pavement as he sprinted toward the main street. 8 years of cardio training kicked in as he established a rhythm, controlling his breathing. He could maintain this pace for miles if he needed to. Her laugh followed him, somehow coming from multiple directions at once. He cut through an alley, vaulting over a stack of pallets. His technique was perfect. He'd practiced urban mobility with his advanced students just last week, but as he cleared the obstacle, he heard her voice right beside his ear. Impressive. David stumbled, barely catching himself. She wasn't there, but the air felt colder. He ran faster. Each turn led him further from the main street, he realized. Somehow, she was hurting him, steering him away from safety, with glimpses of red hair and echoing laughter. The industrial district's empty buildings loomed around him, their darkened windows like dead eyes. His lungs burned. Impossible. He could go 5 rounds without tiring, but fear was sapping his endurance. The cold seemed to be coming from inside now, spreading through his chest with each gasping breath. When he hit the dead end, he knew she'd planned it all along. The loading dock rose before him, concrete walls on 3 sides. David turned, back against the wall, and finally saw her clearly. She wore a business suit that might have been elegant in daylight. Now it just made her look like a predator playing dress-up. Her red hair was styled in a modern cut, but her eyes belonged to something ancient, something that had never been human. "Good chase," she said, her voice cultured, amused. "I love it when they're strong. The blood tastes better with fear and fitness mixed in." David's fists came up. His technique was flawless. He drilled these movements thousands of times. The straight right shot out like a piston. She caught it with one hand. Her skin was as cold as ice. "Oh," she purred, "you're going to turn me on." His other fist swung in a perfect hook. She let it connect. The impact felt like hitting concrete, and her smile grew wider. David thought of all his training, all his fights, all his victories. None of it mattered now. He was just meat and blood, being played with by something that saw him the way he saw his protein shakes. The last thing he saw was red, her hair in the darkness, falling around him like a curtain. The last thing he heard was her delighted laugh. The last thing he felt was cold. In the morning, they found his gym keys still hanging on their hook, gleaming in the dawn light through his office window. The security camera footage showed him walking out, locking up, and then nothing. Just another missing person in a big city. Richard Erickson sat in his study, nursing his 3rd scotch of the evening. The local news played quietly on his tablet. Agent Sarah Winters talking about another missing person. He barely registered it. 3 weeks, he muttered to the empty room. 3 weeks without a call. Probably spending his nights at that damn gym, playing fighter instead of building a real future. He didn't see his son standing in the shadows, head tilted at an inhuman angle, eyes reflecting the study's warm light like a cat's. Didn't sense how David's new smile widened, showing teeth too sharp for the son he'd raised. David watched his father drink, remembering the taste of scotch. It seemed bland now, compared to his new appetites. Behind him in the darkness, red hair gleamed. Carmilla was waiting.